I'm Todd Culver, the Assistant Director for Marl, and welcome to our YouTube Safety Training Series. Our topic today is back injury prevention. Back injuries hurt. They're very expensive to treat, and they happen more often than you think. What we'll talk about during our time together today is some of the things that can cause back injuries and some of the things that we can do to prevent a problem from occurring. The average cost of a back injury in the United States is $9,000 without surgery and $35,000 with surgery. The cost to U.S. industry annually is $12 billion in workers' compensation alone. It accounts for 20%, or 1 out of every 5 workplace injuries, and 80% of Americans will at some point in their lives suffer from lower back pain. Some of the things that can put our backs at risk include posture and body mechanics. Posture is the position that we put ourselves in when we're not moving, and body mechanics is the position that we put ourselves in when we are moving. Next is force and repetition, which are pretty straightforward. The amount of force you need to exert goes up with the weight of the object that you're lifting and carrying. So the heavier the object, the greater the risk of back injury. And with repetition, if an employee has to lift and move an object 50 times during the course of the day, the risk for injury is greater than if they have to lift and move it 5 times a day. Another risk factor that makes the list is smoking, which may come as a surprise to many of you. We all know that smoking puts our heart and lungs at risk as it compromises our cardiopulmonary functions. But it also is a risk, increases the risk for lower back injury, and here's why. If we smoke cigarettes, we introduce nicotine into our bloodstream, and nicotine actually slows down the circulatory process, which affects our rate of healing. And if you look at back injuries as a cumulative problem, damage to the muscles that build up over time, the body's ability to heal itself is actually a preventive measure. So if we slow down that healing process, we actually increase the risk for producing symptoms and suffering from lower back pain. An additional risk factor is the loss of flexibility, strength, and endurance, which happens naturally with age. It is not something that we have to accept naturally. There are things that we can do to contradict those natural progressions. Certainly with age comes some degeneration occasionally, and also stress is a risk factor, as it is with many chronic health conditions. Extended exposure to vibration, and not just the use of tools which subject the lower back to vibration, but actually if an employee is in a static position on a piece of equipment that vibrates. For example, truck drivers are amongst the job category with the highest incidence of back injuries. That certainly can increase the risk. And the fact is that it all adds up. And that brings us to the concept of cumulative injuries, since most back injuries develop over time and are not the result of a single event. It's not like getting an electric shock or tripping over an extension cord or falling off a ladder. These are injuries that occur over an extended period of time. And sometimes we don't know there's a problem until it's too late, until the symptoms are produced. The shape that our backs are in today is a result of habits, both good and bad, that have been built up through the course of an extended period of time. And if our habits have involved using our backs in demanding ways, the effects are adding up, especially as we age. The good news is that by changing habits now, or at least starting to change, we can help undo some of the damage that may be present. So that's what we'll focus on today, is what we can do to prevent back injuries from occurring. And we'll focus on 3 areas. The first is to pay attention to the best position and body mechanics that the environment will allow when sitting, when standing, and especially when lifting. Next is when the environment is challenging, we change it. And that's called ergonomics. And third, we can help our bodies tolerate the tasks that we ask them to perform through exercise and conditioning. We'll begin that first area with a brief anatomy lesson. The spine's natural position is curved. We're often told to sit up straight or stand up straight, and that's not the way our backs are built. The natural curves mean that when it's in that naturally curved position that you see on the screen now, the muscles that support the spine are in their strongest position. The bones or vertebrae and the padding in between those bones, which are discs, are able to absorb the most shock. It's the position our backs were designed to be in. The more often we use them the way they were designed, the better our chances to avoid injury. The more often we move our spine outside this natural position, the greater the risk of injury. It's when we get out of position that problems can begin to occur. And when we refer to posture, we're talking about the position that our bodies are in when we're not moving. And on the screen now you see some examples of poor posture, particularly when seated. It's also true that when standing, particularly when fatigue occurs, a natural progression can take place where the chin begins to droop a little bit with fatigue, and then the shoulders begin to roll forward. And sooner rather than later, the entire upper body is moving in a forward direction, which can flatten out the curve in the lower or lumbar area of our spine and can end up causing lower back pain. I'd like to show you another example of how poor posture can actually contribute to a lower back problem. The area of our back that's most at risk of injury is the lower back, which is referred to as the lumbar area of the spine. And that curve, as you saw in the diagram of the spine, hits most of us right about here, and that curve goes in this direction. And that's the curve that we're trying to protect. So consider for a moment what happens to that curve that is naturally in this direction if, when I sit down, I sit down like this. You can see that the curve actually moves in the opposite direction, moving my spine away from the position that it's designed to be in. If I do that for just a few moments, it provides a gentle stretch for the muscles that support my spine, and that's fine. But if I do that for hours and hours, day after day, over time, it not only can begin to shift my spine outside of the position that it's designed to be in, but if I don't recondition those muscles to bring the spine back into that position, over time I become more susceptible to back injury. So a choice that we make as simple as seated posture can have an impact on whether or not we're going to experience lower back pain. When our backs are placed outside of that natural position that they're designed to be in when we're moving, is referred to as bad body mechanics, and the most obvious example of that is when we utilize poor lifting techniques. Now, it's not always practical to go through a 10-step procedure analyzing every single lift or material handling task that we go through during the course of the day. But if you remember a few basics, you'll definitely minimize the risk of injury. On the screen right now are examples of lifting techniques. On the left-hand side is the position that we wish to avoid, where we bend forward at the waist to lift an object from floor level. I mentioned earlier that 80% of all Americans will at some point in their life suffer from lower back pain. An even more alarming statistic applies to folks who perform lifting tasks in this fashion with upper body flexed forward, bent at the waist. When an injury, a back injury, does occur at work, 85% of them occur when the employee was to some degree in that position that you see on the left-hand side of the screen, bent forward at the waist, flexed with the upper body. Instead, when we have to bend somewhere, we should bend at the knees, not at the waist. Of course, it's not always possible or practical to go through a 10-step process every time we need to lift something, but if we remember just a few basic guidelines when performing lifting or material handling tasks, will significantly minimize the risk of injury. The first is when you have to bend somewhere to reach something or to lift it, is to bend at the knees, not at the waist. We try to stay as upright as possible, protecting the natural position, the natural curves of our spine. And if you do have to bend forward to reach something, if you can find a sturdy, stable object upon which to support your upper body weight, that can take the stress or the force off your lower back if you do have to bend forward by placing a hand in front of you and supporting that upper body weight. If you keep the load close to your body, it significantly reduces the amount of force on your lower back as well. And to avoid the twisting motion when lifting or carrying anything, instead to move your feet, to keep your toes and your knees and your hips always pointed in the same direction. So if you have to bend somewhere to reach an object or to lift it, please bend at the knees, not at the waist. Keep the load as close to your body as possible and avoid the twisting motion. The second area that we have some influence over with regard to reducing the chance for back injury is called ergonomics. And a kind of subtitle or soundbite that's used to describe that subject is fitting the job to the person. And it represents a change in the way that we look at doing work, particularly manufacturing work, that's occurred over the last 15 to 20 years. In the old days, a job was set up around the product that was being made or perhaps the process that was being used to make it. And a worker had to fit themselves into that process without any regard for their comfort level when performing those tasks. And quite often the rules were, if that task produced discomfort, particularly if the worker complained about it, that person was fit right out the door. Ergonomics is about a different way of looking at work, to design the task, to design, in fact, the entire working environment in such a way that it becomes easier on your body. And that runs counterintuitive to some traditional ways of looking at work. Old school thinking sometimes says we don't want people to be comfortable at work because they're on the job, when in fact, if you think about it, if a task is designed to keep a worker comfortable, it not only reduces stress, which can therefore reduce the chance for repetitive strain injury, but if we have an increased comfort level, then that employee is more likely to pay closer attention to the detail that's important to issues of both productivity and quality. Some examples of ergonomic accommodations or designs include adjustable chairs with good lower back support, hydraulic lift and tilt tables that can adjust the height of materials being handled and perhaps even the angle to minimize awkward reaching and twisting, and even snow shovels that you may have seen with a bent or angled handle so that the shovel or the tool does the bending rather than the person who's doing the work. Through changing the surroundings and adjusting the work environment, paying attention to issues referred to as ergonomics, we can increase the efficiency involved in completing the task, reduce the physical demands, and therefore reduce the chance for injury. And most ergonomic solutions are easy and inexpensive and come from the people who are doing the work. There are certainly adjustments and equipment purchases that can be made that cost thousands of dollars and require extensive expertise, but most solutions come from the person who's doing the job and are both easy to introduce into the working environment and inexpensive to accommodate. The third area that we do have control over with regard to reducing the chance for back injury is conditioning. And certainly strength building exercises can be very helpful, as can aerobic exercises. The more that we do to keep moving and maintain strength, the more likely we are to stay healthy, and that carries over into the workplace where it reduces the chance for injury, particularly cumulative trauma or repetitive strain. On the screen now you see some examples of both strength building and stretching exercises for the core muscles, which are the term we use to refer to the abdominal and lower back muscles. If you do what you can to not only get stronger but become more flexible and build endurance, will go a long way towards reducing the chance for getting hurt. On the screen over the next few minutes, you'll see a series of exercises that are very simple to do not require a gym membership or any special equipment or clothing, that can be done, in fact, at your workstation, that just take a few minutes to perform and will go a long way towards keeping the upper body a little more flexible and reducing the chance for lower back pain. I mentioned earlier, 80% of the folks who live and work in this country have had a back problem or at some point in their lives will experience lower back pain, which is an extraordinarily high percentage. And the reasons for that are many. That's why so many people have a problem. There are a number of risk factors, many of which we've reviewed in our time together today. And since most back injuries are cumulative in nature as a result of damage that builds up over a long period of time, in many cases we can be performing tasks or making lifestyle choices that are actually doing damage, and we don't pay for it because we don't realize it. So by promoting some awareness in 3 areas, I'm hopeful that we can reduce the chance for back injuries. And those areas, again, are paying attention to the best posture and body mechanics that the environment will allow. And that includes when sitting, when standing, and most especially when lifting. If the environment is challenging, we change it. And that's referred to as ergonomics, making the adjustments that we can at the workstation and throughout the entire working environment to keep a person as comfortable as possible, and helping our bodies tolerate the tasks that we do ask them to perform through exercise and conditioning. Thank you for your time, and be careful out there.